Hello, I'm Donal Riordan from Fishnua. We have a new political party which is representing environmental issues primarily, but also representing change in the debt-based economic system. My own history in environmental issues, I suppose, goes back about 22, 23 years. I've been involved quite actively in the anti-fluoride campaign, the fluoridation of water. Written an awful lot of letters, submissions to budget and so on. Been involved in the transition town movement in Bandon for many years, and I've been involved in the campaign against the harmful effects of radiation from mobile phone masts and pylons for a long time now, I suppose since the early 90s, 92 or thereabouts. I've also built my own house, and I kind of do my best to live the environmental way as much as I can, and that cannot be done in isolation. So, I've learned that it just isn't possible. So everybody needs to move together on this issue, and I'd like to thank everybody for coming here as well this afternoon. Okay. I suppose I'll be very short and sweet on this. I will be certainly voting with my heart. And I've been an environmentalist for over 20 years, and I kind of try and live like that. So that would be it in a nutshell. I would be voting with my heart. I would be, representing people's concerns as much as I can. Okay, and I'll just finish. One of my favourite subjects, trees. Well, I grow up and plant trees, so I do. The one thing I would do in particular in relation to climate change and greenhouse gas emissions is I would like the law to be changed to include the proper calculation of CO2s. A lot of the time you've got a situation where, for instance, the likes of a Toyota Prius has very low emissions on the road, but they're not taking into account the amount of CO2s that was used to actually construct the vehicle. They do the same thing with nuclear. When you're mining the uranium, you are taking millions of tons of material out from the earth. You're digging down maybe a mile or two into the ground, and this is done maybe in one country, down in Australia, down in South Africa, wherever it's done, and all of the CO2s that are burnt up in that country are completely start at zero then when we go to the calculations in the EU. So I think that that's a complete and absolute farce, and I would work specifically towards changing that legislation so that the proper calculations done for the whole planet, because that's what we're talking about, the whole planet. We cannot just have ourselves in isolation and say we're all right, So the tree cover I've been on for many, many, many years. I think I first wrote to the Department of Forestry. I won't say the year, it'd be frightening, but about 40 years ago plus anyway. And I've spent an awful lot of time campaigning to have more tree cover for many, many, many years. I won't get into all the detail because we don't have time. Thank you very much. Okay. Biodiversity in rapid decline. One of my favourite things, I suppose, an interesting thing is if you take barren land, for instance, and there's quite a lot of land that has become barren by overgrazing of the likes of sheep and so on. And what happens then is the land gets degraded, and sometimes, if any of you have done any hill walking, when you go around the hills, I can remember walking the hills 40 plus years ago, and the hills would have been fairly lush, whereas today, as a result of overgrazing, you're into a rock. You're walking almost on barren rock. It's like a desert. So in order to increase biodiversity, there's something that a lot of people mightn't have thought of, is to actually maybe take that land, and instead of grazing it, to maybe take some of the sheep off it for a long period of time, or maybe permanently, and then what you do is you allow it to come back and grow back. The sheep don't even do very well on it anymore because there's so little grass left on it. So the best thing is maybe to come to some agreement with the farmers in the area, and this could be done throughout the EU, I think. And if those areas were set aside for biodiversity, then what would happen is you'd see it come back. Biodiversity is such a huge subject. At the other end, you've got to have to stop polluting, like biodiversity of sea, for instance. So you've got to improve sewage treatment and the likes of that, and you've got to include treatment of outflows from industry and so on, so that the pollution doesn't happen, which destroys the biodiversity in the vicinity of high population centres and so on. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I suppose first and foremost, in my view, the fluoride has to come out of the water. I don't think that Cork could conceivably become the European green capital with fluoride in the water, which of course is a serious carcinogen. That's first and foremost. The second thing is the fruit trees. I'm totally with the fruit tree idea. We actually have a project going in Bandon, which maybe Bernie might not be aware of at the moment, where it's kind of along the lines of this film that somebody talked about. I didn't even see it. It's called Incredible Edible, where a town decided to grow fruit trees all over the whole town. And Bandon is adopting that at the moment. We have, 40, we have loads, 50, 60, I don't know how many fruit trees we planted. 140 a few years ago, and we planted another load now. And we have a nursery going now in the allotments, which was created by the Transition Town movement I was involved in. And I'm directly involved in this project as well, which is it's essentially, we're planting fruit trees. Literally, you will see fruit trees already in Bandon out on the main road in places you mightn't even know there are apple trees there, and you're wondering what are they doing there. And you see them dripping with apples. It's absolutely lovely. But we've only got one or two out there yet. But there's a good few smaller fruit trees actually planted. They'll take a few years to come on. But I think that if Cork were to take on this as a city, that it would really make a big difference to the city's external image and its credibility as a green capital. Thank you. I wrote to the Department of Forestry, I remember back, I'd say it was around 1970, and I asked about the percentage tree cover. I think it was 5 3/4 or something percent, or it was around that anyway. And then I asked what were their plans at the time. And they were planning, I think, by 1980 to have 15% tree cover, as far as I remember. And it was all going well for a while. They were increased, and they actually made 8.5%, I think. And then next thing, it sat there for an awful long time. It's heartening, I suppose, to see that we've reached 12 in one sense, but in the other sense, it wasn't quite up to my expectations of 15%. And if they have a plan of 18% now, it's good to see that as a plan. I suppose at least they're planning forward. But to answer the original question, the question was, would we support the funding for setting up a special location that would train people and so on? I think funding is, again, we're back to the debt, we're back to the money, and a lot of things do unfortunately boil back down to money. And again, our Fish Nua party, our whole trust, you could say, is about changing the money system. We live in a debt-based money system. In other words, if the government wants to allocate money to this at the moment using the current money system, the government has to borrow it. Which to my mind is absolutely crazy. I think that the money creation should be returned to governments away from the banks, because every government is in debt, and next thing they have to borrow money before they can do something they should be doing anyway. So I think that the debt-based money system needs to go. Once that's gone, there's money for whatever you actually want to do, which is where it's at. Thank you very much. Try anyway.
Yes.
There was, I thought it was referring
talking
to
about
reducing
the-
energy consumption as well. Or were you talking about that as well, Liam?
Another one.
Yeah. All right, that's the second question, is it? So,
Did you ask a different question? You asked about energy consumption. Did you?
yeah, and about reducing energy usage. I think you were talking about that earlier. Yeah. So, like the people talk about an energy audit, and again, it's back to the same thing. You talk about the Toyota Prius rolled off the production line. Yeah, it uses less energy while it's driving on the road, but the problem is how much energy did it take to actually manufacture this car? Whereas you've got an old banger there, an old car, we'll say, it's there for 20 years. It's already been manufactured. The amount of energy that it costs to manufacture it has already been consumed. Whereas so it would make more ecological sense to actually keep that on the road, provided it's not completely, provided it's safe and so on, and provided it's not going to overly pollute. But these things can strike a balance, and that can reduce consumption. That's one way of reducing consumption that I can talk about. There are so many ways. It's just vast, really. But an energy audit, I mean, who is it in the transition town movement? They have an energy audit. They've done a whole town energy audit, I think, in Clonakilty, and that sort of thing could be. I mean, if you made that maybe. That you could maybe legislate for that, have that happen throughout the whole of Europe, and next thing, all of a sudden, you're actually counting how much energy you're consuming. Personally, I believe that it can be done at cost basis. The biodiversity, I think we kind of answered that already to a degree.
What about the scrub clearance?
The biodiversity, the scrub clearance, yeah. The scrub clearance is obviously can be a huge thing. It's you see, that's where to hit the nail on the head there. What you've got is you've got the needs of the farmer versus the needs of all of the people together. And there's a dynamic there. I don't know, there was some quote in I remember in Star Wars years ago where the needs of the individual versus the needs of the whole. And this is at the nub of that problem, where you've got the individual is there trying to survive, and next thing you've got the needs of the whole. So you need an education where the people who are farming need to be educated in terms of the value of the biodiversity of the wildlife and the ditches and so on, instead of just clearing the ditches and using them all.
Sorry, you're wrong in phone. The law requires farmer to remove scrub. Otherwise, they will lose their payment.
Oh,
in
yeah,
that area.
okay.
That is the problem.
Oh, that's
they have to change the law.
Okay,
Sorry.
so that law needs, obviously that law does need to go, so in that instance.
Absolutely.
Yeah, well, thank you for clearing that up. Yeah. Okay,
Kieran,
thanks very much. I don't think that Europe could benefit economically. You see, there's economic short term and there's economic long term. I think that fracking itself causes serious damage to the environment. It causes damage to the water table. You've got the fracking. What it does is it damages the structure of the way the whole thing comes. And next thing, before you know it, you've got well water contaminated with oil. This has happened over in the States. So in areas that have fracking, and next thing they find whole town water supplies are destroyed. So I've a fracking-free badge here. I've signed a pledge to oppose fracking completely if I get elected. Yeah, well, I suppose I've opposed GM foods all along, and I would continue to oppose them in as much as I could. That's the first thing, and I suppose the second thing that could be done would be to liaise with the people on the ground who are campaigning actively against GM foods, so that because they are usually a lot more knowledgeable on the subject, in that they will know what the best idea is, what to do. Is it, what's the fallback position in the next trench back the line if you're stuck in a situation where it's being pushed through anyway? What do you do next? Sometimes it's good to have a second trench in the warfare against GM foods, but I've opposed it all along for many years.
Okay.
Actively.
Thank you very much, Donal.
Yeah, I've already signed a commitment to try and, because this seems to be a hot topic at the moment, to essentially, I think I understand anyway, what's happening is the discussions are happening behind closed doors instead of in the fray of the European Parliament, in the actual elected representatives being involved in it. Obviously, I've already signed to oppose that those type of discussions, so that the discussions would be actually that the elected representatives would be involved in it. I suppose again it's back to the most important thing that people need to do, I suppose, and that I would like to see happen in as much as possible in Europe, and I would be fighting for, would be to push the power back down to the people, so that the power is back down at local level, because these sort of, when you have such a concentration of power at the centre of Europe, it's very dangerous. So that would be one of the things that I would be pushing, as well as obviously I've already signed a commitment.